Hey guys, tonight we're taking a sleigh ride straight into the foggy, frost-bitten heart of Christmas mythology, the dark, weird, and absolutely bonkers origins of Santa Claus, aka Street. Nick, Kris Kringle, Sinterklaas, that guy who breaks into your house once a year and eats your snacks. Forget the jolly old elf you see in Coca-Cola ads. Tonight, we're talking about the real Santa, part gift giver, part medieval home intruder, part Viking fever dream, and just a dash of legal nightmare. Before we jump into this avalanche of holiday absurdity, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me your strangest Christmas memory, or, honestly, just confess if you ever tried to catch Santa on camera and traumatized yourself. I'll read them all while wrapped in my electric blanket. Grateful I wasn't born in 14th century Finland. Now, dim the lights, switch on your fan for that cozy white noise, and get comfortable. Maybe pull the covers over your head, because things are about to get spookier than that fruitcake Aunt Carol brings every year. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered why Santa lives at the North Pole? A place so inhospitable that even penguins call it quits. Why is he obsessed with chimneys? Why does he have a team of flying reindeer and a sweatshop full of elves who apparently don't unionize? Why does the original Street Nicholas sound less like a mall Santa and more like a low-budget vigilante? What did medieval children actually expect in their shoes, gifts, coal, or something with teeth? And why did so many cultures decide that a bearded stranger sneaking into your home at night was a good thing? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up somewhere between the frozen forests of pagan Europe and the candlelit churches of medieval Asia Minor. You're cold, confused, and a little worried about the guy in the red robe eyeing your boots. Welcome to the real story of Santa Claus. Hope you like moral lessons delivered with a side of existential dread. You open your eyes to candle smoke and the scent of frankincense. It's the 4th century in Myra, and you're watching a bishop named Nicholas. His hobbies? Charity, secret gift dropping, and occasionally punching heretics in the face at church councils. He's not the guy from the mall. He's the reason Christmas was once less about cookies, more about wild acts of charity and the occasional religious brawl. Let's set the scene. The world outside is full of superstition, poverty, and exactly 0 Christmas ornaments. You're bundled in a threadbare tunic, huddling in a stone church, while Nicholas, who looks less like a jolly grandpa and more like the guy you want on your side in a bar fight, prepares to deliver another sermon. This is a world where saints aren't smiling in stained glass. They're out on the streets, dodging Roman officials, arguing about theology, and occasionally slipping coins to desperate families under cover of night. Nicholas is the local celebrity, but for all the weirdest reasons. His most famous move? The original Santa drop. Instead of swooping down a chimney with a bag full of toys, he sneaks out at midnight, a pouch of gold clinking under his robe. Why? Because one of his parishioners is broke. And in this era, that means your daughters are one step away from being sold off or worse. Nicholas waits for darkness, tiptoes up to the window, and hurls a sack of gold inside. No gift receipts, no Instagram story. If you're lucky enough to wake up to mysterious money on your floor, that's a Christmas miracle. If not, tough luck. Try again next winter. But Nicholas isn't all stealth philanthropy. He's also famous for righteous rage. Flash forward to the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, the original world's worst office holiday party. Bishops from across the empire are arguing about whether Jesus is, technically, divine or just divine adjacent. In one corner, Arius, a smooth-talking heretic with a questionable beard. In the other, Nicholas, getting steadily more furious. Legend says Nicholas finally stands up, walks across the marble floor, and punches Arius square in the jaw. Not exactly peace on earth and goodwill toward men. But hey, sometimes the spirit moves you to lay hands in the most direct way possible. For this, Nicholas is thrown in jail. He doesn't apologize, because in the 4th century, punching someone for bad theology is only mildly frowned upon. While he's in the slammer, he reportedly receives a miraculous vision. Jesus and Mary drop by, hand him a book and a bishop's stole, and let him out. No lawyer required. Try using that excuse at your next HR meeting. Let's talk about his vibe. Nicholas walks the streets, blessing orphans and widows, feeding the poor, and occasionally cursing greedy merchants. He's got the energy of your most stubborn grandparent, mixed with the unpredictable generosity of a lottery winner who also has a black belt. Everyone in town knows his reputation. If you're hungry, he'll find a way to feed you. If you're lying, cheating, or shortchanging your neighbor at the market, he'll probably glare at you until your crops fail out of sheer guilt. He's also the patron saint of sailors, which is as random as it sounds. When a storm hits, Nicholas's followers pray, "Throw a little wine in the sea," and hope the bishop is in a good mood. The stories pile up. Nicholas rescues kidnapped children, multiplies grain for famine, stricken villages, and allegedly resurrects 3 murdered boys who'd been pickled in a barrel by an evil butcher. Yes, that's really in the folklore. Merry Christmas, everyone. Through all this, Nicholas isn't doling out gifts for applause. He's moving in secret, setting the original good vibes only standard. No matter how hard life gets, there's this one stubborn bishop reminding people that sometimes miracles show up in the middle of the night, or, if you get out of line, right hook you at a council. So next time you see Santa in the mall, remember, the real street. Nick would probably drop a gold coin in your shoe, say a prayer for your arthritis, and, if necessary, body check a heretic, all before breakfast. Not bad for the original Claus. It's winter in the Middle Ages. If you hear scratching at your door, it could be rats, or Nicholas, ready to sneak coins into your shoes, or, depending on the legend, abduct you for being naughty. There's no elf on the shelf surveillance, just moral terror and medieval parenting at its finest. Let's set the mood. You're huddled with your family under a pile of wool blankets, the wind howling like your cousin after losing at dice. The only thing thinner than your walls is your sense of security. Every snap of a twig, every creak in the dark, you're asking yourself, is that street, Nicholas, or something with more legs? In the candlelight, your mother tells stories, some heartwarming, others designed specifically to haunt your dreams. Nicholas, she says, is always watching, not with a jolly twinkle, but with the stern vigilance of a medieval dad who just found your secret stash of mead. Back then, Santa wasn't just a one-night visitor with a bag of presents. He was the supernatural accountant, keeping a running tally of your moral debt. Your job as a child? Set your shoes by the hearth, hope for silver, and absolutely panic about that time you stole a turnip. If you're lucky, Nicholas drops in a coin, maybe a hunk of stale bread. If not, well, let's just say some versions of the legend included a sack, a stick, and a very long walk into the snow. You might be wondering, how did a generous bishop turn into the boogeyman of bedtime? Thanks centuries of parental improvisation. In a world where basic survival was a full-time job, nothing got kids to behave like the threat of being taken by a passing saint. Sometimes Nicholas came with companions, each one creepier than the last. In parts of Europe, he brought along Black Peter, a soot-stained sidekick who handed out coal and allegedly free corporal punishment. In other regions, you had to worry about Krampus, the original Christmas demon, who specialized in dragging the naughtiest kids away in a basket. Makes getting socks for Christmas seem downright generous. Let's talk about the shoes. There are no stockings hung by the chimney with care, just your everyday footwear, stuffed with hay or a desperate note asking for anything better than last year. On the appointed night, you line up your shoes and wait. If you've been good, you might get a shiny coin, or, if the harvest was bad, a carrot with suspicious bite marks. If you've been bad, well, sometimes the gift is a reminder from Nicholas to try harder next year. Usually in the form of a stick. Picture waking up at dawn, shivering with excitement, only to find a bundle of twigs in your shoe. It's the medieval equivalent of getting blocked on social media, but somehow even more humiliating. Charity in the Middle Ages was complicated. On one hand, Nicholas represented hope, the chance that, even in the coldest season, a little generosity might appear out of nowhere. On the other, he was a cautionary tale. Mess up, and the mysterious forces of winter would come knocking. The village priest, eager to keep everyone in line, leaned hard into the scary stories. Sunday sermons weren't just about spiritual salvation. They were an annual review of everyone's behavior, with Nicholas as the original HR manager. Sometimes he even appeared in the flesh, a bearded man in a red robe, going house to house, blessing some kids, and scaring the daylight out of others. Over time, these tales mutated. In some places, Street Nicholas became gentler, evolving into the jolly grandfather type who forgave your mistakes with a wink. But in the deep winter nights of medieval Europe, you knew better. Behind every act of kindness was the faintest hint of menace, a reminder that survival and morality were forever tangled together. Be good, your mother warned, or Nicholas will know. And just like that, charity and threat became two sides of the same frosty coin. So next time you see a Santa ringing a bell outside the mall, just remember, his medieval predecessor might have been watching, but he was also ready to drag you off by the ankle if you tried to peek before Christmas morning. Sleep tight. You're huddled in a hut, shivering. Suddenly, someone's clambering onto the roof. Chimneys are less cozy escape for magical grandpas, and more practical entry point for saints, spirits, and local thieves. And yes, Santa's ancestor would rather risk a sooty face than face your disappointed parents. Let's be clear. Chimneys in the Middle Ages are not the storybook brick tunnels we know today. They're basically holes in the thatch, designed to vent out more smoke than personality. Most are just gaps in the roof, with a thin trail of heat escaping into the darkness, and not a single sign of a hearthside glow. So when someone's creeping around up there after midnight, it's not a hallmark moment. It's a medieval crisis. You clutch your blanket, heart racing, as visions of saints, spirits, and that guy from 3 huts down who's always borrowing things without asking run through your mind. Why chimneys, you wonder? Because doors in medieval Europe are loud, creaky, and guarded by large dogs or angry geese. Only the most desperate or the most magical would dare a front entrance. So, for Nicholas and his imitators, the chimney isn't just a shortcut. It's the only way in without starting a neighborhood-wide uproar. The element of surprise is half the gift. Picture the scene. It's freezing, the wind is howling, and a mysterious figure is risking hypothermia just to squeeze down a hole above your fire. There's a good chance he's getting stuck, or at the very least, picking up a healthy lungful of soot on the way down. The earliest chimney-based Santas had to be athletic, patient, and willing to brave a medieval roof after midnight. That's Olympic-level dedication for a career that pays in gratitude and whatever snacks survived the rat patrol. And of course, chimneys weren't just for the good guys. In a world where thieves and hungry wanderers roamed at night, slipping down a chimney was considered an elite life skill. Right up there with not dying of exposure and being able to sleep with one eye open. People locked their doors, barred their windows, and then spent all winter worrying that someone would drop in uninvited, literally. Even the phrase "getting the sack" could mean waking up to find yourself actually being stuffed into one by a local spirit or vengeful Saint Nick. For the medieval mind, the chimney was also a liminal space, a kind of magical passage between the safety of your smoky hovel and the wild, dangerous night outside. It's not just where your firewood disappears in a cloud of ash. It's the spiritual express lane for winter's weirdest visitors. If you hear footsteps on the roof, it could be Nicholas with a coin, or it could be a poltergeist, a goblin, or, worst of all, your neighbor looking to borrow your last carrot. You're never sure. The only guarantee is that it's never boring. Of course, in some places, the legend morphs. Can't fit down a chimney? No problem. Santa's ancestor can ooze through keyholes, squeeze under doors, or manifest in the ashes like an extremely motivational ghost. In alpine regions, people hung protective charms over their hearths, just in case the guest dropping in was a little less saintly and a little more interested in the family goat. But there's another side to this. When Nicholas chose the chimney, he was making a point, sneaking in at midnight, leaving gifts with no witnesses. He's not asking for thanks or applause. He's modeling radical charity, good deeds done in secret, unnoticed except by the desperate and the cold. The soot-stained bishop is the original social worker, the patron saint of not getting caught. So next Christmas Eve, when you see a big man in red on a roof, remember, the tradition started because sometimes the only way to do a little good in a suspicious world is to drop in through the most inconvenient entrance possible. If you wake to find a gift by your fire, thank your lucky stars it wasn't a burglar or a goose. In the medieval winter, that counts as a holiday miracle. The wind howls. In the old Germanic world, winter nights belonged to the wild hunt, a ghostly procession led by Odin or a monstrous figure with a white beard. Is that Santa's great-great-grandpa chasing lost souls? Or just an extremely festive Norse god? You decide. While hiding under the nearest table, this isn't your average silent night. It's the deep midwinter, and you're peering out a frost-crusted window, hoping whatever's out there isn't looking back. In the darkness, villagers trade stories about the wild hunt, a supernatural parade thundering across the sky, horses snorting fire, dogs barking with voices that sound suspiciously like your deceased uncle. The leader? A giant, wild-eyed figure on a spectral steed, beard whipping in the wind, cloak billowing like a storm cloud, and definitely not someone you want squeezing down your chimney. Before Santa was dreaming of sugar plums, he was probably dodging these night riders. Ancient folklore is a fever dream of overlapping legends. Sometimes it's Odin with his 8-legged horse, collecting souls and leaving behind mysterious gifts, if you count surviving the night as a gift. Sometimes it's a local chieftain turned spectral bully, or Frau Holly, a winter goddess who shakes out snow from her feather bed and punishes lazy children. The medieval answer to "who's out there" is always worse than you think. If you lived in this world, you wouldn't be hanging stockings by the fire. You'd be hanging charms over the door, hiding anything that looked vaguely delicious, and possibly smearing ash on your face so the spirits mistake you for one of their own. The wild hunt isn't just a parade. It's an omen, heralding disaster, plague, or just the world's creepiest night out. If you hear the hunt, you don't investigate. You lie down, face first, and pretend you're a very cold log. Let's talk visuals. Forget jolly elves and Rudolph. The wild hunt's reindeer are replaced by skeletal horses and wolves with glowing eyes. Instead of presents, they scatter ill winds, and occasionally, if they're feeling generous, a silver coin, probably cursed. The leader's beard? Impressive, intimidating, and prone to catching stray souls. It's not hard to see how this all eventually morphed. Very gradually, and with a lot of editorial oversight, into a magical old man who gives gifts and wears red. Imagine centuries of mothers, desperate for a little order, repurposing the story. Be good, or the wild hunt will get you, unless Street Nicholas rides through first. This is where things get confusing. In some regions, the line between Santa and the supernatural is blurry at best. Sometimes, he's the benevolent bishop protecting children. Sometimes, he's the old spirit himself, sneaking through the sky, deciding who gets blessed and who gets a face full of winter curse. People left out offerings, bread, ale, hay for spectral horses, hoping to appease whoever was passing by. If you forgot, or worse, fell asleep, you might wake up to find muddy hoofprints on your roof and an unsettling sense of having barely avoided disaster. And yet, there's a kind of hope here, too. The wild hunt wasn't all doom and gloom. Survive the night, and you might be a little luckier. Maybe your crops won't freeze. Maybe your lost sheep find their way home. Maybe you even get a coin for your troubles. The midwinter world is scary, yes. But it's also full of weird generosity. A cosmic, supernatural secret Santa, if you will, who sometimes leaves you gifts and sometimes just scares you straight. So next time you see Santa soaring across the sky, sleigh bells jingling, remember, he's just the latest driver of an ancient supernatural carpool. Once upon a time, it was Odin or a frost demon leading the charge. Now it's a jolly old man with a questionable sense of boundaries. Either way, winter nights are never boring, and if you hear footsteps on the roof, maybe just stay under the table until morning. Trust me. Forget elves. Tonight, you meet Krampus, the horned, chain-rattling anti-Santa who shows up to whip children and drag them off to who knows where. You've never been more motivated to behave, or more grateful your stocking contains only coal. Let's set the mood. It's a bitter December night in the old alpine villages. The wind howls, frost creeps up the window panes, and every sensible child is hiding under scratchy blankets, clutching a stale piece of bread for comfort. Suddenly, bells jingle, but not in a good way. They're heavy, clanging, and coming from the darkest alley in town. You peek out from behind the curtains, and there he is, a towering, goat-legged nightmare with horns curled like cinnamon rolls, a tongue that would terrify a giraffe, and chains clanking so loud they drown out your prayers. Krampus has arrived, and bedtime just got a lot less peaceful. Here's the thing, while Santa is out there, cheerfully tossing candy and coins to good kids, Krampus is working the night shift for the bad list. The medieval world doesn't believe in subtlety when it comes to moral instruction. You're not getting a talking to. You're getting an existential crisis. The threat isn't no presents for you, it's get it together, or you'll be whipped, stuffed in a sack, and possibly eaten by a half-goat, half-demon with serious anger issues. That's not just negative reinforcement. That's nightmare fuel with a bow on top. And parents are loving this. Nothing gets chores done faster than the rumor that Krampus is coming to town. Medieval moms whisper, "Be good, or Krampus will get you," and suddenly the floors are swept, the turnips are peeled, and even the family goat is getting suspiciously polite. There are no safe spaces. Krampus is an equal opportunity disciplinarian. Boys, girls, even the town drunk, if he gets too rowdy at the feast. The message? No one is safe from accountability, especially in December. Now, Krampus isn't working alone. He's the original bad cop in the strangest holiday buddy routine ever invented. In some regions, he travels with St. Nicholas, both of them showing up at your door. Nicholas with gifts and blessings, Krampus with switches and threats. Imagine opening your front door to find a saint and a demon, smiling in perfect partnership. like a medieval version of Good Morning America with much higher stakes. If you've been good, Nicholas hands you a treat. If you've been bad, Krampus might chase you around the yard, wave a bundle of birch branches at your backside, or, worst case, haul you off in a basket, never to be seen again. It's a motivational program, medieval style. The Krampus Run is a real event, by the way. In villages across Central Europe, grown adults dress up as Krampus and parade through the streets, scaring children, tourists, and the occasional unlucky sheep. There's fire, noise, and a level of chaotic energy that would give OSHA a stroke. And this isn't just for show. The line between performance and supernatural threat is delightfully blurry. People genuinely lock their doors, hang garlic and crosses, and hide anything remotely snackable, just in case Krampus gets peckish. You're told it's all in good fun, but nobody's laughing when the shadows get long and the bells start to jingle. But, and here's the twist, Krampus is also a weird form of hope. If you survive the night, you're basically guaranteed a better year ahead. You've faced the worst the winter can throw at you, stared into the horns of darkness, and come out with only a mild case of emotional trauma and maybe a bruise or two. It's the universe's way of saying, congratulations, you're still here. Next year, try harder. So, next time you grumble about getting coal for Christmas, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. For them, a little coal was the best possible outcome. After all, it means you're home, safe, and Krampus is off somewhere else, rattling chains and giving motivational speeches no one wants to hear. Sleep tight and maybe check under the bed, just in case. You find yourself placing offerings, fruit, bread, a little ale, on the hearth. Turns out, giving gifts wasn't just about generosity. It was about bribing winter spirits so they wouldn't haunt your livestock or curse your turnips. Santa is just the polite version of this system. Let's paint the picture. It's the coldest, darkest stretch of the year. You're wrapped in itchy wool, the fire is crackling, and somewhere outside, the wind sounds suspiciously like it's chanting your name. You're not giving gifts because you're in the holiday spirit. You're giving gifts because, deep down, you're hoping to keep the night quiet and the mysterious knocking at the door to a minimum. Fruit and bread aren't just for sharing. They're a sort of ancient insurance policy against supernatural vandalism. In a world where winter blues means actual spirits are out to get you, generosity is just good risk management. Think of winter as the original horror movie. If it's not frostbite, it's famine. If it's not wolves, it's whatever lives in the woods and really hates lazy farmers. The old stories say the land is crawling with invisible guests, house elves, goblins, or the dreaded Yule cat. Yes, a giant cat that eats anyone who didn't get new clothes for Christmas. File that under parenting by terror. Every spirit has a weakness. Maybe it's a bowl of porridge, maybe a slice of pie. Forget to pay your dues, and you might wake up to find your milk soured, your animals mysteriously ill, or your socks mysteriously gone. There's strategy to this. You don't just toss out the leftovers and hope for the best. The offering has to be intentional, well-placed, and sometimes oddly specific. In Scandinavia, a little bowl of Christmas porridge is left out for the niece, a cranky farm elf who'll either protect your home or tie your cow's tail in knots, depending on the quality of the porridge. If you skimp, he's offended. If you forget entirely, well, you're in for a season of broken tools and milk that smells like regret. In other regions, the gift-giving is aimed at ancestral spirits, wandering souls, or those shadowy figures who might just be lost relatives, or might be the original freeloaders of the supernatural world. You light a candle, pour a drink, and mutter a polite request. Please don't curse my cabbage. It's part celebration, part negotiation. and entirely an act of desperate winter optimism. Enter Santa Claus, centuries later, with his red robe and bag of gifts. He's not here to threaten your cows or curse your produce. He's here to accept cookies and milk and maybe, if he's feeling generous, drop off some presents. The rituals remain. Leave something nice out. Hope for something better in return. But the vibe has changed. Now, it's less about fending off doom and more about spreading cheer. Or at least, that's what we tell the children. But if you look closely, the old logic is still there. Santa's nice list is just a rebrand of the ancient scorekeeping. Be good and you'll get a present. Be bad and you might get nothing. Or, if you're really unlucky, a visit from his not-so-friendly colleagues. Parents the world over have leaned into this system for centuries. Share your toys, or the Christmas witch gets your tablet. Even modern Christmas markets, with their endless sweets and shiny trinkets, are just ancient bribery in a cuter package. So next time you set out cookies and milk, remember, you're part of a grand, slightly paranoid tradition of holiday self-defense. Those treats on the mantel aren't just for Santa. They're a silent offering to every spirit, gremlin, and mischievous elf who might be lurking, judging your hospitality, and waiting for an excuse to ruin your new year. Sleep tight, and maybe put out a little extra bread, just in case. Red suits? Try bishop's robes, ancient shamanic cloaks, or just the bloodstains from a typical winter sacrifice. Santa's look changes, but it's always a little alarming and never, ever machine washable. Let's talk medieval fashion. You wake up in the dead of winter and see a figure on the road. A tall man in a swirling robe the color of dried cranberries, trailing fringe and possibly a few errant animal bones. Depending on the century, he's either a highly respected bishop, a wandering shaman, or just the local guy with the best access to dyes and the least fear of animal guts. There's no department store velvet, no faux fur trim, and definitely no tag in the back that says dry clean only. Every inch of Santa's wardrobe is a walking, talking mood board for chaos. You'd think the red suit is a modern invention, but the tradition goes way back. Bishops, like good old Street, Nicholas wore ceremonial robes, deep crimson or purple, sometimes trimmed with gold, but more often patched and worn from years of actual use. The color wasn't just festive, it was a signal to the crowd. Here comes someone important, someone halfway between God and the town gossip. Medieval dyeing was a dangerous game, involving crushed insects, roots, and a lot of prayers that the color wouldn't wash out at the first sign of rain. If your robe faded to a weird brown, you just pretended it was on purpose. But let's not forget the other side of Santa's fashion history, the shamanic ancestor in his cloak of animal pelts and bones, traipsing through the snow with a staff and a stare that says, "I've seen things." In Siberian and Northern European traditions, winter spirits and shamans wore whatever the landscape coughed up. Fox fur, bear hide, sometimes a hat made from the whole head of a wolf, teeth included. These outfits weren't for style, they were for survival and intimidation. If you saw someone dressed like that coming through the woods at night, you offered your best bread, locked the doors, and hoped your goats looked healthy. Bonus points if you weren't wearing red. Some spirits hate competition. And then there are the bloodstains. No, really, winter was prime time for sacrifices, both animal and, on rare and deeply illegal occasions, human. Cloaks often got spattered with the evidence of last night's appease, the gods' festivities. By the time Nicholas rolls into town, there's a good chance he's covering up some highly suspicious marks with a new layer of wool. In some folk tales, the red in Santa's suit is less Coca-Cola and more cultural trauma. Try putting that in a holiday ad. If you're looking for accessories, forget the North Pole bling. Ancient Santa might have sported a bishop's mitre, tall, pointy, and guaranteed to poke someone in the eye if worn indoors. Or maybe he's got a staff, not so much for support as for whacking away evil spirits or badly behaved peasants. Bells, chains, garlands of dried herbs, his look is less Instagram ready and more. Do not approach unless you want a curse or a blessing, maybe both. Even when Santa starts softening up in the late Middle Ages, the wardrobe never really loses its edge. In some regions, the holiday visitor shows up in a cloak patched with every color of the rainbow, halfway between a wandering prophet and the world's most tired juggler. In others, he borrows the uniform of local pagan gods. Green for the forests, blue for the rivers, or white for the relentless, unforgiving snow. And always, there's that stubborn streak of red, a little festive, a little threatening, impossible to ignore. So the next time you see a mall Santa, spare a thought for his wardrobe's bloody, muddy, centuries-long evolution. Behind every ho-ho-ho is a laundry nightmare, a bit of ecclesiastical flair, and the ghost of a shaman who probably smelled like smoked reindeer and existential dread. Just be glad your holiday sweater only has eggnog stains, and maybe stick to machine washable. You're dozing off when you hear scratching and giggling. Medieval elves weren't cute. They stole babies, soured milk, and ruined your sleep. It took centuries of rebranding before they were trusted with making wooden trains. Let's rewind to a world where elves are less workshop interns and more paranormal home invaders. In the old days, elves didn't come with jingling hats or candy-striped leggings. If you encountered one, you weren't asking for a toy. You were checking your pantry for missing bread. Or worse, your cradle for missing children. Elves, or their even less helpful cousins, goblins, imps, and trolls, were blamed for everything you couldn't explain. That rash on your arm? Elf shot. Your butter turned rancid? The elves were in the dairy again. The medieval world was basically a running list of grievances against the local supernatural population. At night, the stories went, the hidden folk snuck in through the cracks in your walls, rode your horses to exhaustion, braided your hair while you slept, and sometimes just pinched you for the fun of it. It's like living with a team of invisible, sugar-crazed raccoons, only meaner and with better aim. You couldn't see them, but you could hear them. Scratching in the attic, cackling in the corners, giggling under the floorboards. Forget sleep. You're spending the night warding off ancient pranksters with bread crusts, iron horseshoes, and desperate prayers to anyone listening. Elves were taken seriously. Medieval law codes actually included fines for elf-related injuries. If you developed a mysterious bruise or fever, people might suggest you had angered the elves by skipping a ritual, leaving out the wrong offering, or, heaven forbid, moving a rock without permission. Some unlucky souls were accused of elf disease, a catch-all for anything from migraines to madness. The solution? Seek out a local wise woman or priest who would prescribe a potent mix of herbs, spells, and, if all else failed, hiding under your bed until the elves got bored. But don't think the elves limited themselves to bad luck and dairy sabotage. If you lived near the woods, you were told stories of changelings. Elf children swapped for human babies. Parents watched their infants closely for signs: strange behavior, odd cravings, a sudden talent for speaking Latin. If anything seemed off, the local remedy might involve salt, fire, or an exorcism. It's a lot of pressure for a baby, and even more for parents just hoping for a good night's sleep. So how did we go from these miniature menaces to Santa's jolly, hard-working crew? Enter the great Christmas PR campaign. As the centuries rolled by, society decided that elves were more fun as helpers than as household terrorists. The Victorians, with their love of sentimental holiday stories and general disregard for accurate folklore, polished up the elf image. Suddenly, elves were tiny, industrious, and inexplicably fond of making toys instead of trouble. red and green outfits, pointy shoes, and a can-do attitude, far more marketable than the old, possibly cursed goblin look. By the time the modern Santa workshop appears, the elves have been fully rebranded. Now, instead of souring milk, they're painting wooden soldiers and assembling teddy bears. The scratching in the night is just the sound of gifts being wrapped, not your shoes being stolen. The only danger is getting on the naughty list and maybe ending up with socks for Christmas, a vast improvement over waking up in a fairy ring. Or, worse, never waking up at all. But if you listen very carefully, late at night, you might still hear something giggling in the walls. Maybe it's the heating pipes. Maybe it's a leftover elf, reminiscing about the good old days of pranks and midnight chaos. Either way, tuck yourself in, hang an iron horseshoe above your door, and hope your milk stays fresh till morning. Santa's elves might be cute now, but history never really forgets. Sleep well, and don't let the elves bite. You're writing a letter to Santa, but in the old days, your naughty deeds were recorded by an invisible spirit, your parents, and possibly your neighbor's goat. The list was less about behavior and more about social control. Nothing motivates children like fear of supernatural punishment. Let's put you in the room. It's a drafty medieval cottage. Your only source of light is a smoky candle stub, and the only thing thicker than the smell of cabbage is the sense of surveillance. You think you're alone, but according to legend, someone or something is always watching. Not just Nicholas, but a whole host of spirits, ancestors, and, if you're really unlucky, the family livestock, all keeping score for the end-of-year reckoning. You want that extra hunk of bread? You'd better not push your brother in the mud, because rumor has it the spirits keep a better record than your parents do. The idea of a list is older than Santa's reindeer, and certainly older than Google Docs. In ancient Europe, the gods and spirits were always updating their own cosmic ledgers. Did you sweep the floor for the house spirit? Did you leave a slice of bread for the goblins? Forget once, and you're on their naughty list. Some families kept their own version, a tally stick for good and bad behavior, sometimes carved with cryptic marks only your mother could decipher. Modern parents have Elf on the Shelf. Medieval parents had creepy story hour and a healthy respect for magical retribution. And you weren't just being monitored at home. In many villages, neighbors acted as amateur surveillance agents, happily reporting your every misstep. Stole an apple from the orchard? Old Agnes next door will add it to the communal gossip, and suddenly everyone's convinced you're destined for goat duty instead of Christmas dinner. Your reputation was your currency. The naughty list wasn't just about personal morality. It was public record, and it could decide whether you were welcomed at the feast or left outside to contemplate your life choices in the snow. The clergy loved this system. Priests would thunder from the pulpit about the book of life, in which every deed was written down and judged. If you were lucky, Nicholas might intercede for your soul. If not, you were on your own. The fear of eternal consequences was a fantastic motivator for both children and adults. Did you forget to tithe? Miss Mass, eat meat on a Friday? Congratulations, you've just speedrun your way onto several lists, none of them involving gifts. But the real genius of the naughty list was its flexibility. Parents could weaponize it at any moment. Didn't want to eat your boiled turnips? That's fine. But the spirits are watching. Thought about skipping chores? Do you want to wake up with coal in your shoes? Or worse, a mysterious rash. Even pets got in on the act. Cats, it was believed, had a direct line to the other side. Act up in front of the cat and everyone agrees you've doubled your chances of spectral punishment. Over time, the threat of supernatural blackmail evolved. The names changed. Saints and elves replaced ancient spirits. But the system stayed rock solid. It was the original crowd-sourced behavioral modification program, centuries before social media. All you needed was a tale of the watchful Nicholas, the fear of a note in some holy ledger, and the possibility of getting skipped over at the winter festival. Suddenly, being good for goodness sake made sense, especially when being bad might mean sharing a bed with the family goat or getting a personalized curse. So next time you worry about ending up on the naughty list, remember, you're participating in an ancient tradition of holiday blackmail, perfected by generations of desperate parents and opportunistic priests. Smile for the spirits. Be nice to the neighbor's goat. And keep your candle lit, just in case someone's watching from the shadows, tallying your every move. Sweet dreams, and may your record stay miraculously clean till morning. It's the night before Christmas, and you're stuffing your shoes with hay, hoping for a coin or a treat. But beware, in some places, an empty shoe meant you were on the menu for hungry goblins. It's less festive, more survival strategy. Let's rewind to the not-so-silent nights of medieval Europe, where the only thing more unpredictable than the weather is what might crawl in through your window after dark. Forget stockings hung by the chimney with care. Most people didn't even have stockings. You used your everyday shoes, the ones that had survived a year of mud, manure, and, if you were lucky, minimal frostbite. Shoes were currency. You cleaned them, patched them, and at least for one night a year, treated them as magical delivery systems for holiday luck. The tradition is simple but fraught with risk. If you wanted to avoid supernatural retribution, or just the family disappointment of waking up empty-footed, you left something in your shoe: hay for the saint's horse, a scrap of bread for the elves, or, if things were really dire, a note asking whoever was in charge of Christmas to please overlook that one time you dropped your sister's doll in the well. The stakes? High. A well-stuffed shoe meant fortune, protection, and maybe even a coin or sweet for breakfast. An empty shoe? Let's just say you might find it missing in the morning, along with a suspicious set of muddy footprints that didn't belong to anyone in your family. But it wasn't just saints or Santa checking the shoes. Local goblins, sprites, and the infamous Yule cat in Icelandic lore all took an unhealthy interest in your footwear. The Yule cat was especially judgmental. It would peer in windows looking for new clothes or shoes. If you didn't have any, it might just eat you. Yes, you could survive a plague and a famine, only to lose out to a carnivorous holiday cat with a footwear fetish. That's history for you. In other regions, shoes became a sort of magical mailbox. Kids left their clogs or boots by the hearth or window, stuffed with hay, carrots, or maybe a wish scribbled on a scrap of parchment. In return, the family hoped for something nice: an orange, a silver coin, or if times were tough, just a reassuringly non-vengeful visit from the Christmas spirits. Sometimes you woke to find your shoes heavier with treats, sometimes they were suspiciously lighter, and every so often you discovered extra hay and a note that essentially read, "Try harder next year." For adults, the tradition became a test of neighborliness. Villages were small, and news of who got what in their shoes traveled fast. There were unspoken rules. You could drop a treat in someone's shoe anonymously, spreading goodwill, but you could also plant a stick or a lump of coal if you felt someone needed a reminder to be less stingy at the communal oven. Some years, it was less season of giving and more passive-aggressive neighborhood audit. The humble shoe became a symbol of luck, generosity, and, occasionally, survival. For every family, it was a night of nervous hope. Wood Street, Nicholas, or his local stand-in. Find your house? Would he approve of your hay? Would the goblins bypass your doorstep for the neighbor's less polished boots? You tried not to overthink it. You made your offering, whispered your wish, and trusted that the ancient toe tax collector was feeling generous. Of course, This is the original holiday anxiety. Did you do enough? Were you good enough? Was your hay too dry? Would your shoe survive another season of wear and tear and supernatural inspection? Only morning would tell. So as you tuck yourself in, shoes lined up and toes crossed, remember, you're not just waiting for Santa. You're running a gauntlet of spirits, cats, and goblins who take shoe etiquette far more seriously than your average parent. Sleep well, and may your shoes be full, and your toes remain unnibbled. Come sunrise, you look up to see a herd of reindeer leaping through the night sky. Are they magical? Maybe. Or maybe someone's been brewing mushrooms again. Early shamans rode reindeer, and possibly hallucinations, long before Santa commandeered the team. Let's set the frosty scene. It's a long winter night in the far north. You're bundled in fur, huddled near a fire, and the only thing breaking the silence is the sound of hooves crunching through snow. For the ancient peoples of Siberia, Scandinavia, and the Arctic, reindeer weren't just background wildlife. They were sacred, mysterious, and, in a pinch, transportation. You didn't just herd them. If you were a shaman, you worked with them, and by worked with we mean you might have been found riding one bareback in a blizzard, chanting to the sky, and possibly seeing colors that don't technically exist. In these cultures, the shaman was the original holiday frequent flyer. Need to deliver a blessing? Need to ward off evil spirits? Strap in, because the preferred method of travel involved a reindeer, a drum, and a pouch of, let's say, special mushrooms. Fly? Maybe not literally, but with enough mushroom tea, anything can fly. The reindeer, for their part, seemed remarkably tolerant of this arrangement. And if they accidentally soared through the air, in the mind of the shaman at least, who's to say what's real and what's just very enthusiastic holiday cheer? The connection between reindeer and the supernatural didn't stop at local hallucinogens. In the dead of winter, reindeer migrate en masse, their silhouettes ghostly against the snow, antlers like living candelabras. To villagers watching from behind frosty windows, it looked like magic. A natural miracle dressed up as a parade. Add a few thousand years, a dash of medieval storytelling, and suddenly you have reindeer leaping across the moon, towing not just sleds but the secrets of the universe. Of course, by the time Santa gets involved, the reindeer are ready for their close-up. In folklore, the sky is a busy place. Odin, the Norse god, rides an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. Not technically a reindeer, but try telling that to a medieval poet. Children left out treats for Sleipnir, hoping Odin would leave them a gift in return. As the centuries rolled by and gods faded into legends, the reindeer inherited the gig. Less baggage, more charisma, and a bit less apocalyptic thunder, but let's not forget the mushrooms. In some versions of the story, shamans dressed in red and white robes. Coincidence? Would collect the bright red Amanita muscaria mushrooms, the ones with the white spots you see on Christmas cards, and hang them to dry in tree branches, looking suspiciously like ornaments. After a long night of spiritual flight, the shaman would return through the smoke hole of the yurt, straight down the equivalent of a chimney, bringing blessings and, depending on how strong the mushrooms were, possibly a newfound fear of reindeer. Santa's flying team was centuries in the making. Early storytellers mashed together pieces from everywhere. Pagan gods, local wildlife, a little shamanic flair, and a lot of winter survival anxiety. By the time the 19th century poem, A Visit from Street Nicholas, comes along, now dasher, now dancer, the world is ready for flying reindeer, and the old, wild magic gets a PR overhaul. So, next time you see Rudolph's nose lighting up the sky, remember, you're witnessing the grandchild of 1,000 winter legends, a shaman's fever dream made family-friendly. Whether it's magic, mushrooms, or just the enduring weirdness of winter, the reindeer games go on. And if you hear hooves overhead tonight, maybe just stay inside and let the spirits have their fun. Not all homes have chimneys. So sometimes Santa, or his creepier cousins, squeezed through keyholes, windows, or, for the especially unlucky, just barged in through the front door. Medieval locks didn't stand a chance. Let's set the mood. It's a winter night in a ramshackle cottage. The wind whistles through the cracks, your candle flickers, and you hear the distinct sound of something trying to get in. There's no sturdy deadbolt, no smart security system, just a wooden latch and a prayer. In an age where doors are warped from rain and keyholes are big enough for a squirrel to moonlight as a cat burglar, it's open season for supernatural holiday visitors. The chimney? Sure, it's the classic route, but let's face it, sometimes it's just not available. Maybe your chimney is just a glorified hole in the wall that doubles as a rain spout. Maybe you're living in a stone hut where the fire just smokes out through a hole in the roof. And even Street Nicholas doesn't have the flexibility to limbo through that. So, like any resourceful mythological figure, he improvises. Window slightly ajar? In he goes. Keyhole wide enough to see daylight? He's slipping through in a swirl of ash and cold air. And for the especially unlucky, he skips the pretense and just strolls in like he owns the place, giving the dog a knowing wink and the family goat a stern look. You might be wondering why these legendary visitors are so determined to get in. In the medieval mindset, the boundary between outside and inside was thin and often violated. Spirits, saints, and seasonal gift-bringers operated with all the respect for privacy of a nosy neighbor with a master key. The message was clear. No matter how you barricade yourself, you can't keep out Christmas or its consequences. Of course, Santa isn't always alone. In some regions, he brings a whole entourage. Goblins who love crawling under doors, Yule lads who peer through windows, and ancient witches with a talent for finding any architectural weakness. They're the original cat burglars, except instead of stealing your jewels, they're inspecting your manners and inventorying your kitchen scraps. If you're really unlucky, it's not even a spirit, it's your neighbor. Dressed up in a hand-me-down robe and a suspiciously fake beard, delivering gifts or reminders to return the rake you borrowed in August. The next morning you wake up to find a turnip in your shoe, your door mysteriously ajar, and your mother insisting that St. Nicholas definitely came in the night, so you'd better behave or next time he'll come in through the window and take your last piece of bread. There's a certain genius to all this. The unpredictability of entry points kept children, and honestly most adults, on their best behavior. Who knew when the next magical home inspection might occur? Forget Santa's he sees you when you're sleeping. In medieval Europe, he might actually be crawling through the pantry as you speak. Locks were more suggestion than security, and the idea that goodness might be rewarded, or badness swiftly punished, was enforced by the ever-present threat of home invasion with a smile. Eventually, as houses got sturdier and locks improved, the myths adapted. Chimneys became the accepted route, probably because nobody wanted to think too hard about the alternatives. But if you live in an old house and hear the floorboards creak around the holidays, don't worry. It's probably just Santa or one of his less reputable cousins testing your security and maybe leaving you a little reminder that in the battle between tradition and privacy, tradition always finds a way in. So tonight, check your windows, stuff something in the keyhole, and maybe leave out an extra snack. You never know who, or what, might decide to drop by for Christmas. Sleep well, and don't mind the gentle rattle at the latch. It's all part of the holiday magic. The darkest night of the year arrives. For ancient folks, this wasn't just time for cocoa, it was a supernatural siege. Staying up all night to guard against ghosts, goblins, and the occasional Saint Nick was practically a community sport. Let's set the scene. You're deep in pre-modern Europe, where winter blues means something entirely different. The solstice is upon you. The sun dips lower every day, and the night creeps in like an unpaid tax collector, cold, long, and impossible to reason with. Everyone in your hut is wide awake, crowded around a barely adequate fire. The wind moans outside, rattling the shutters. Is it the wind or something else? You're not taking chances. The entire village is on edge. Superstition is the official weather forecast. This is the night when the veil between worlds is thinnest, when the restless dead and things with too many teeth supposedly roam the frozen fields. Your job? Don't let anything in, and for heaven's sake, don't fall asleep first. Grandma is muttering protective charms in the corner, tossing herbs into the fire. Dad sharpens a stick. You clutch a wooden spoon and try not to make eye contact with the darkest corner of the room. Every culture has its own winter defense system. In Northern Europe, people hang sprigs of holly and rowan above the door to ward off witches. In the Alps, families burn Yule logs so big they threaten to take out the roof, all in the hope that the fire keeps the bad things at bay. You don't just light a candle, you keep it burning all night. It's less about ambiance and more about making sure nothing sneaks in while you're blinking. Let's talk about food. This isn't a night for a quick snack and bed. You're expected to lay out offerings for the ancestors, for the household spirits, for anything hungry enough to wander in. A little bread for the goblins, some ale for St. Nicholas, in case he stops by with a moral test. If you forget, you might wake up to spoiled milk, sick cows, or suspiciously gnawed turnips. Medieval risk management. Don't tempt fate, especially on the longest night, and don't even think about venturing outside. The brave, or the foolish, who left the safety of their homes during the solstice risked running into the wild hunt. Vengeful fairies? Or, in some legends, entire armies of angry ancestors. If you had to pee, you made it quick, and you never, ever looked over your shoulder. But here's the twist. All this terror wasn't just about survival. It was about togetherness. The solstice was the original lock-in party. A night when even the grumpiest neighbor would crowd around the fire for warmth and safety. Stories were swapped, songs were sung, and grudges were temporarily forgotten. If you could laugh in the face of cosmic dread, you were halfway to winning the night. Sometimes there was a surprise visitor, someone dressed as St. Nicholas, or the local Lord of Misrule, or just your uncle in an old bearskin cloak. Was it a blessing or a warning? Either way, the heart rate went up, and nobody fell asleep for another hour. The line between supernatural and social control blurred into a single sleepless vigil. So, as the hours dragged on, you watched the eastern horizon for that first sliver of dawn. When the sun finally returned, there was a cheer, a communal exhale, and a wild hope that spring would eventually come. You'd survived another solstice, hungry, exhausted, but maybe a little stronger. Tonight, when you flip on your electric blanket, just remember, your ancestors survived the darkness not with cocoa, but with courage, rituals, and a community determined to keep the lights on. And, if needed, a sharpened spoon. Sleep well, and may your night be blissfully uneventful. You're reaching into your stocking and... surprise. In earlier centuries, gifts ranged from nuts and apples to small weapons, or a helpful frog. Merry Christmas. Here's a turnip and a mild hex. Let's be honest, modern Christmas gifts are predictable. A mug, a scarf, a gift card, maybe some headphones if Santa's feeling generous. But rewind a few centuries, and the gift exchange looked less like a department store and more like a slightly unhinged farmer's market run by tricksters, herbalists, and bored local saints. Your stocking, or more likely, your boot was a wild card. You might find a handful of chestnuts, a dried apple, or something more, well, alarming. Nuts were a classic. Not just because they lasted through the winter, but because cracking open a walnut by the fire was entertainment. Some families believed nuts had magical properties. Find a double-yolked hazelnut? That's good luck. Find a worm? That's, well, time to check the hay for more surprises. Apples, too, had symbolism, the promise of health, renewal, or, if the skin was a bit shriveled, just a gentle reminder that winter was not for the weak-stomached. But the real excitement came from the weird gifts. In some regions, children received carved wooden knives or slingshots, tools for hunting, defending the family turnip patch, or just keeping siblings in line. Merry Christmas. Here's a slingshot. Don't break the window this year. In harsher times, you might find a hunk of salted meat, a wedge of cheese, or a piece of lard. Not quite the PS5 of its day. But in a world where calories were currency, it might be the difference between feasting and famine. For the truly lucky, there was money, usually a single coin, polished to a shine. If St. Nicholas was feeling flush, or if a relative was trying to show off, you'd wake to find silver gleaming in your shoe. But just as often, you'd find a message, sometimes cryptic, sometimes a joke, sometimes just a stern reminder to be good or else. Medieval humor was, at best, a lesson wrapped in a riddle. Then there were the gifts that made you question whether Santa had a sense of humor or just a mean streak. A frog? In some cultures, yes, a live frog considered lucky, especially if it hopped away before you could scream. A bundle of herbs or garlic for warding off spirits and colds, or a small, mysterious bag filled with something that looked suspiciously like dirt but was actually a spell against nightmares. Practical if you didn't mind your bed smelling like a garden. And let's not forget the turnip. In lean years, the humble root vegetable became the all-purpose gift. Carve a face into it, and it's a proto-jack-o'-lantern. Boil it, and you have dinner. Give it to your least favorite cousin, and you have a family grudge that lasts until next Yule. Sometimes, gifts came with warnings, tiny bundles tied with red string, said to contain a mild hex, just enough to keep you humble or nudge your conscience through the next 12 months. The best and worst part? You never knew what you'd get. It was a grab bag of luck, creativity, and, occasionally, thinly veiled parental advice. Got a handful of straw? Maybe it's a hint to help muck out the barn more often. A single clove of garlic? Maybe it's time to brush your teeth or watch out for vampires. So, as you dig through your stocking this year, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. Behind every wrapped gift is a long tradition of improvisation, weirdness, and the occasional helpful amphibian. If your present seems odd, just be grateful it's not a frog, a turnip, or a weaponized lesson in humility. And if it is, well, at least it'll make for a good story next year. Sleep tight, and may your gifts be just the right kind of weird. You overhear a story. 3 children, chopped up by a butcher, miraculously revived by Nicholas. Suddenly, Santa's "he sees you when you're sleeping" sounds comforting by comparison. Let's settle in. It's another bone-cold winter night, and the fire in the hearth throws long, dancing shadows across the walls. The village is quiet, except for the one house where everyone's gathered, neighbors, cousins, a couple of dogs, and that one uncle who always brings up local crimes right before bed. Tonight, the adults decide it's time for a festive tale. Not the warm, fuzzy kind, but the classic medieval bedtime story, where the moral lesson is wrapped in a chilling reminder to watch your step and your butcher. In the flickering firelight, the oldest villager tells the story. Long ago, in a time of famine, 3 children wandered the snowy streets looking for food and shelter. They stumble into a butcher's shop, hoping for kindness. What they get is the medieval version of stranger danger. The butcher, not exactly in the Christmas spirit, does the unthinkable. He lures them in, then, let's say, prepares them for long-term storage. The details are vague, but let's just say there's a barrel involved, and nobody is asking for a snack anymore. But fear not. Enter Nicholas, the bishop with a sixth sense for unsolved mysteries and a miracle for every occasion. Passing through the town, he gets a bad feeling, as one does when there's a barrel in the basement and nervous energy in the air. He demands the truth, utters a prayer, makes the sign of the cross, and suddenly, the impossible happens. The children emerge from the barrel, whole and unharmed, blinking in the firelight and probably vowing never to eat sausage again. It's the ultimate Christmas resurrection. 3 kids, 1 saint, 0 lingering trauma. So the story goes. You'd think this would be a story reserved for the grown-ups, but in medieval Europe, this was prime bedtime material. The message was clear. Nicholas wasn't just handing out gold and blessings. He was a supernatural problem solver, part detective, part miracle worker, part strict but loving grandparent. No one else could pull off a rescue quite like him, and his reputation only grew with each retelling. This isn't even his only adventure. Street. Nicholas's resume is loaded with high-stakes miracles. Rescuing kidnapped sailors, saving innocent prisoners from execution, feeding whole towns during famine, and, yes, turning up at the exact moment someone's about to make a terrible decision in the kitchen. In the medieval imagination, Nicholas is everywhere, silent, watchful, and only a whispered prayer away from busting in to fix things or, if necessary, give you a stern talking to about basic ethics. Parents loved these stories. They had a dual purpose: keep kids in line, behave, or Nicholas might find out, and reassure everyone that, in a world where disasters happen daily, someone was out there looking out for the vulnerable. If you're scared of what lurks in the dark, take comfort. There's a saint with a direct line to justice, and he's not afraid to use it. It's worth noting that despite the grisly details, these tales weren't meant to traumatize. They were meant to show that, in a world filled with danger and uncertainty, hope could come from the unlikeliest places, a miracle in the darkest night, a rescue from the bottom of a barrel, a new beginning when all seemed lost. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember, Santa's greatest ancestor didn't just bring gifts, he brought second chances, happy endings, and just a little bit of old-fashioned moral terror. And if you wake up feeling watched, don't worry. It's probably just Nicholas, making sure everyone's still in one piece. Sleep well, and keep an eye on your sausages. You're expecting a gift, but instead, a lump of coal or, on lucky years, a chunk of meat. In some regions, Santa was basically the world's strictest meal delivery service. Let's set the scene. You're curled up in your family's one-room cottage, the wind outside doing its best impression of an angry banshee. The only thing colder than your toes is the dinner menu: turnips, more turnips, and a festive side of boiled disappointment. The only thing keeping hope alive is the old tradition. If you've been good, Street Nicholas might bring something special. If you've been less than saintly, you might get something that is less special, like a rock. Or, if your luck is truly running out, nothing at all. In the centuries before mass-produced toys and plastic packaging, Christmas gifts were blunt and brutally honest. There were no participation trophies in the medieval stocking game. For most families, coal was a necessary evil, the difference between a warm breakfast and a morning spent gnawing on frozen bread. So when Street Nicholas, or his local understudy, left a lump of coal in your shoe, it was part punishment, part practicality. The message was clear. You've got some work to do, kid. But here's something to keep the fire going while you reconsider your life choices. Now, for those who actually made the nice list, the rewards could be downright luxurious. A small sausage, a sliver of bacon, or, on especially miraculous years, a chunk of salted meat was cause for celebration. Imagine the thrill of waking up to find a single link of sausage in your boot, an edible trophy for months of doing your chores and not tattling on your siblings. Meat was rare, precious, and, for many, the culinary highlight of the entire winter. This was Santa as a medieval Uber Eats driver, dropping off the kind of protein that kept you going through the long, hungry season. The logic here is painfully simple. Food was a reward, and fuel was a warning. If you found coal in your shoe, your parents didn't even have to say anything. The whole village would see the evidence. "Ah, I see you got the black rock of shame this year. Rough, but if you landed a piece of dried ham, you'd be the toast of the playground." Until the ham mysteriously vanished, and your younger brother's lips looked suspiciously greasy. In some areas, the tradition took on its own strange flair. You might wake up to a marrow bone, or a sliver of cured fat, highly practical, slightly terrifying. Occasionally, a stern adult would explain that the coal represented the fire of reform, a gentle nudge to do better next year. Kids, naturally, had their own theories. If you eat the coal, does it turn into candy? Spoiler, no, but you'll get a free dental checkup from the family goat. Of course, the idea of edible gifts didn't stop with meat. Some families traded fruit, cheese, or hard bread, anything that could last through the winter. It was the ultimate combination of nutrition and moral accountability. Merry Christmas, and may you reflect deeply on your shortcomings while you eat this boiled potato. In a world where calories were a form of wealth, the Christmas stocking was a microeconomy of discipline and reward. So, as you drift off tonight, spare a thought for the kids whose Christmas haul was equal parts dinner and discipline. Whether you ended up with a feast or a future fuel source, every gift was a message, every meal a lesson. Next time you grumble about socks under the tree, remember, at least you're not expected to eat your present or fuel the family fire with your bad behavior. Sleep well, and may your stocking be meaty and your coal purely decorative. Some legends flip the script. Santa isn't the jolly judge, but the one getting chased, punished, or exiled for causing too much mischief. Justice is cold and, apparently, heavily bearded. Let's picture it. You're sitting by the fire, half listening to the grown-ups trade holiday horror stories, when someone says, "Did you know there are places where Santa isn't the hero, but the villain?" Suddenly, you're a lot more alert and grateful for every boring Christmas you've ever had. In this version of the story, St. Nicholas has overstepped. He's handed out one too many questionable miracles, or maybe he's just annoyed the local authorities with his unsolicited midnight visits and general disregard for property boundaries. In some medieval folk tales, Nicholas's reputation for sneaking around and breaking into houses hasn't won him many friends among the respectable townsfolk. Imagine being the mayor of a small European village. Every winter, there's a mysterious figure in a red robe running around after curfew, tossing coins, stirring up the youth, and occasionally cursing greedy merchants. It doesn't take long for the community to decide. This guy needs to be stopped. Enter the Santa Patrol, a hastily assembled gang of local dads, nuns, and anyone with a torch, ready to run down the bearded intruder and put an end to his festive chaos. And when they catch him? In some stories, Saint Nick is literally put in chains, locked in a cellar, or paraded through the town square as an example to others who might try to hand out unsolicited charity. Justice, medieval style, is always a little bit extra. Santa's not just arrested, he's humiliated. Some villages even staged mock trials, charging him with crimes ranging from breaking and entering to inciting excessive merriment. You can almost hear the verdict: guilty. The the sentence I sown night in the stocks, and absolutely no reindeer privileges for the rest of the season. But Santa isn't the only one to get the villain treatment. In the wild world of European folklore, the role of Christmas troublemaker rotates between various figures: the Yule goat, the Krampus, and, occasionally, Nicholas himself. In some Italian stories, Babbo Natale gets run out of town for making a mess or showing up at the wrong house with the wrong kind of gift. In others, a suspiciously familiar Christmas man is thrown into a river, exiled to the woods, or just booed out of town by children who didn't get what they wanted. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing that even Santa has had years when absolutely nothing went right. If you think about it, this makes a weird sort of sense. For every story where St. Nicholas is a saintly savior, there's another where he's just a little too enthusiastic with the gift-giving, a little too eager to punish or bless, and a little too mysterious for medieval comfort. People are suspicious of outsiders, especially ones who climb down chimneys or squeeze through keyholes. Sometimes, the only way to restore order is to put even the patron saint of Christmas on the naughty list. But don't worry. These Santa in chains stories rarely end in disaster. In the true spirit of the season, Nicholas usually manages to escape, apologize, or just bribe his way out with another coin or two. The villagers laugh, the chains come off, and the whole thing becomes another excuse for a feast, a song, and a healthy respect for the unpredictable nature of holiday magic. So, next time you see Santa parading down Main Street, remember, in another century, in another town, he might be the one in the stocks, learning that even the best-intentioned gift-giver can end up on the wrong side of tradition. Justice may be cold, but even in chains, Santa always finds a way to bring the party. One wintry night, you hear bells, but instead of reindeer, it's a parade of skeletons following Street Nick. In some Eastern European stories, the line between holiday cheer and existential dread was razor thin. Let's set the stage. It's late, the wind is howling, and you're tucked beneath a mountain of scratchy blankets, listening for familiar Christmas sounds. You expect hooves on the roof, a jolly laugh in the distance. Instead, the air fills with eerie clinking and rattling, like 1,000 bones knocking together in the cold. You peek out the frosty window and spot them, a ghostly procession, skeletal figures dancing in the snow, led by none other than Street Nicholas himself. No ho 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 here. Just the sense that you've accidentally signed up for the world's weirdest caroling group. This isn't a nightmare, it's folklore. In pockets of Eastern Europe, Poland, Slovakia, Ukraine, and beyond, the midwinter season was haunted by a tradition known as the Skeleton Parade, where death and festivity walk hand in hand. The local wisdom was simple. If you don't respect the dead, or if you forget to honor your ancestors, they might just show up, led by Street Nick, to remind you. And trust me, nobody forgets after seeing Uncle Vlad's skeleton doing the poker in the moonlight. The Skeleton Parade wasn't always sinister. Sometimes it was a reminder, life is short, winter is long, and the border between the living and the dead can be surprisingly thin on cold nights. Children were warned, be kind, share your bread, remember those who came before you. Ignore these lessons, and the parade might march right through your house, leaving icy footprints, missing pies, and a trail of existential dread in its wake. Street Nicholas, in these stories, isn't just a bringer of gifts. He's a cosmic tour guide, leading the spirits out for a stroll, making sure everyone remembers their place in the great holiday balance sheet. His presence is both comforting and terrifying. On one hand, if you see him, it means you're being watched over, kind of like Santa's he sees you when you're sleeping, but with a full supporting cast of your dearly departed. On the other hand, nobody wants a skeleton knocking on the door to critique your hospitality. For grown-ups, the Skeleton Parade was a not-so-gentle reminder to make peace, settle debts, and bake an extra loaf of bread. just in case the hungry spirits were stopping by. If you heard the bells at midnight, you'd light a candle, whisper a prayer, and maybe pour a little vodka on the threshold. Hospitality to the dead was serious business. Fail to observe it, and you risked a year of bad luck, lost livestock, or a haunting so embarrassing even your neighbors would talk. The parade wasn't all doom, though. In some villages, people dressed as skeletons and street Nicholas, going house to house, collecting treats, blessings, or occasionally a warm shot of spirits. Think of it as trick-or-treating with a much more philosophical twist. Give us a cookie, or we'll remind you of your mortality. It's both hilarious and strangely wholesome. Over time, the line between Street Nick's jolly festivities and the world of the dead faded. Christmas, in these parts, became a festival of life, death, and community. A time to remember that while the cold nights are long, we're all in this together, bones and all. So, as you drift off tonight, if you hear mysterious bells in the distance, don't panic. It's just Street Nicholas leading his skeleton parade, reminding everyone to celebrate the good, honor the past, and maybe sleep with the lights on, just in case. Welcome to medieval Yuletide, a season of wild feasts, masked parades, and legal immunity for mischief. Christmas wasn't always silent or holy. It was more like Mardi Gras, with extra frostbite. Let's step outside your cozy, candle-lit cottage and into the bustling chaos of a medieval town at Christmas time. The streets are packed, not with well-behaved carolers or solemn worshippers, but with costumed revelers, people in animal masks, and enough rowdy laughter to scare off every sensible bird for miles. The air smells like roasting meat, spilled ale, and the vague threat of misrule. It's cold, it's loud, and, miraculously, no one seems to care that they haven't washed their clothes in weeks. For 12 whole days, from Christmas to Epiphany, all bets are off. Here's the medieval twist. For most of the year, the church, the nobility, and the local lord run a tight ship. There are rules, curfews, and a general expectation that you don't challenge authority unless you want to end up in the stocks or minus a hand. But the 12 days? All those rules take a nap. Peasants swap places with nobles, at least in the pageants. Kids appoint their own boy bishops, and the town fool is suddenly in charge of the feast. It's democracy by way of slapstick. A brief, delirious carnival where your neighbor's opinion of you is briefly less important than your ability to dance on a table without breaking it. Feasts spill from the great halls to the meanest hovels. The rich open their doors, sometimes under duress, and everyone eats until their belt buckles surrender. Cooks compete to see who can roast the strangest animal. Eels, hedgehogs, it's all fair game if you can catch it and the Lord's not looking. Meanwhile, the local clergy are torn between joining the party and trying to keep some semblance of spiritual order, usually by inventing new, ever stricter rules about how many times you're allowed to dance around the churchyard in a single night. Mischief is not just tolerated, it's encouraged. Masked mummers barge into houses, performing raucous skits for food, drink, or a new pair of socks. They leave if you give them ale, but they might stay all night if you don't. Practical jokes escalate. Your pig goes missing and shows up dressed as the Virgin Mary, or you find your door barricaded with cabbages and goat horns. This is the era of misrule, a world turned upside down, where the local troublemaker is hailed as the Lord of Misrule, given a crown of paper and a legally binding right to call the vicar a potato. With all the revelry comes the inevitable: a few bruised egos, some very creative hangovers, and at least one person swearing off eels for life. But the beauty of the 12 days is their function as a social pressure valve. After months of darkness, hunger, and back-breaking labor, everyone gets to let loose. secure in the knowledge that come Epiphany, order will be restored and the jokes will be forgiven. Mostly. And don't forget, this chaos had a purpose. These rowdy nights brought people together, boundaries blurred, grudges thawed, and communities survived the cold by sharing warmth of the fire and of spirit. It was history's original office holiday party, but with more pigs and a lot less paperwork. So as you drift to sleep tonight, just remember, the calm, silent night Christmas is a modern invention. If your holidays ever get a bit loud, unruly, or weird, you're just keeping up with centuries of glorious, frosty, festive mayhem. Sleep well, and may your dreams be full of laughter and zero surprise eels. You wake to find not cookies, but a smorgasbord of medieval snacks, beer for Santa, biscuits for the elves, and, in the far north, a suspiciously psychedelic mushroom tea. Let's set the table. It's Christmas Eve, and you're not reaching for the chocolate chip cookies or leaving out a glass of 2% milk. Instead, you and your family are laying out a rustic feast that looks less holiday baking special and more pantry clean-out meets seasonal survival. On the hearth, you place thick, hard biscuits, the kind that could double as self-defense weapons if thrown at the right angle. They're sweetened with a trickle of honey, if you're lucky, or the last spoonful of jam left over from the summer. The elves apparently have a high tolerance for crumbs and the occasional accidental tooth chip. But wait, it's not just biscuits. You glance over to see a wooden cup brimming with home-brewed beer. And no, this isn't a one-off. For centuries, brewing beer for Christmas was the highlight of the season. Even children drank the small beer, a low-alcohol, high-survival beverage that was often safer than water. Santa, or St. Nicholas, or whichever ancestor was sneaking down your chimney, would probably have been delighted to find a pint waiting by the fire. After a long night visiting every house in Europe, who wouldn't need a drink? If you're a kid, the best you can hope for is a thimbleful, strictly supervised by your most responsible cousin. Of course, the real wild card comes from the far north. Here, in the snowy wilderness of Lapland and Siberia, you're not just leaving out snacks. You're participating in a time-honored shamanic tradition. Forget the milk. The locals brew a tea from bright red Amanita muscaria mushrooms, the classic fairy tale toadstool with white spots. If the elves seem a little too giggly and the reindeer start leaping a bit higher than usual, you now know why. Shamans, dressed in red and white robes, sound familiar? Would brew up a special holiday potion, drink it, and, if the legends are to be believed, embark on wild midnight journeys. Sometimes the shaman entered the yurt through the smoke hole, carrying gifts and messages from the spirit world. The line between magical flight and mushroom hallucination gets a little blurry around the solstice. The snacks themselves were never just snacks. Every treat had a purpose. Honey cakes to sweeten the new year, biscuits and gingerbread for luck, beer to toast the ancestors, a special loaf for the tomt or nis, the cranky house spirits who might leave a blessing or a mess, depending on how well you baked. It's a culinary balancing act between making peace with the supernatural and keeping the family in good spirits, sometimes literally. For most families, luxury was rare. A little sugar, a handful of dried fruit, a secret stash of nuts, or a piece of preserved cheese could be the highlight of your holiday. If things got really fancy, you might get a chunk of marzipan, or, in the wealthier towns, a king cake with a bean or coin baked inside. Whoever found it would be crowned Lord of Misrule for the night, expected to dole out jokes, commands, and, inevitably, some regrettable party tricks. So as you drift off tonight, the scents of yeast, honey, and mysterious herbs swirling through the cold air, remember, behind every modern Christmas treat is a long, slightly weird history of creative survival, wishful thinking, and the hope that at least one of your guests can appreciate a biscuit hard enough to outlast winter. If you wake up to find your beer missing and your mushroom tea mysteriously depleted, just chalk it up to Santa's secret recipe, and maybe leave an extra snack out next year, just in case. Sleep well, and may your dreams be merry, bright, and only a little bit psychedelic. In a smoky cottage, you overhear women swapping tales. Mrs. Claus didn't exist yet, but plenty of older legends had powerful winter women, some who helped Santa, and some who kidnapped children for not cleaning their rooms. Let's settle in. The fire's low, the wind is high, and everyone who's not asleep is gathered around, clutching mugs and whispering the kind of stories that linger long after the candles burn out. You expect to hear about St. Nicholas or Father Christmas, but instead, the women lean in and begin speaking of other winter visitors, ancient, mysterious, and not to be trifled with. Forget gingerbread grannies and apron-clad helpers. These winter women are equal parts nurturing and terrifying, the sort of figures who could bake a loaf of bread with one hand and hex your entire bloodline with the other. Let's start with Frau Perchter. In the German-speaking Alps, she's the original holiday quality control officer. Each winter, Perchter comes down from the mountains, disguised as a stooped old woman with a beaked nose and an eye for detail. Did you spin enough wool? Did you sweep the hearth? If you passed her inspection, she might leave you a silver coin or a pat on the head. If not, well, there are stories involving sharp knives and the sort of midnight home surgery that could scare you straight for life. Talk about motivation for chores. Finish your weaving, or Perchter will know, mothers whisper. And suddenly every spindle is spinning faster. Then there's La Befana, Italy's own winter witch. Long before Mrs. Claus was filling stockings, Befana was swooping through the night on her broom, dusting floors and distributing gifts. She's got the compassion of a saint and the efficiency of a cleaning service, leaving candy for the good kids, coal for the lazy, and probably a stern note for anyone who didn't brush their teeth. The best part? If you forget to leave her a treat, wine is a favorite. She'll sweep your house anyway, because even the supernatural can't stand a dirty floor. Other tales feature the Yule lad's mother, Gryla, up in Iceland. Gryla is no helper. She's a mountain giantess with a taste for misbehaving children. Each year, she descends from her snowy lair with a sack, collecting kids who broke the rules, or possibly just made too much noise at dinner. You might expect this story to traumatize, but Icelandic children grow up with Gryla's legend and seem to thrive on it. Don't want to do chores? That's fine. Gryla's always hungry. Parenting, northern style. Of course, not all winter women are scary. Some are silent helpers, invisible hands who keep the hearth burning, the bread rising, and the traditions alive. In Russian tales, Babushka is a grandmotherly spirit who regrets not following the Magi and instead travels house to house, giving gifts to children as an act of atonement. In Scandinavian legend, house spirits like the Nis or Tomte are often gender fluid, but when female, they're fiercely protective, tidying up at night, scaring off mice, and occasionally rearranging your shoes if you forget to leave a snack. It's no wonder that by the time Mrs. Claus appears in Victorian America, she's a much gentler figure. She bakes cookies, mends suits, and generally keeps Santa from misplacing his mittens. But beneath the sweetness is a memory of the fierce winter women who came before her, rule enforcers, gift givers, and the ultimate authorities on who's been naughty or nice. Mrs. Claus is the PR-friendly update of centuries of formidable females who didn't just help with Christmas. They were Christmas, in all its warmth, warning, and wisdom. So tonight, as you nod off and dream of kindly grandmothers in red, remember, long before Mrs. Claus, winter was a woman's domain, and heaven help you if she caught you with a dirty room or an unspun spindle. Sleep well, and maybe sweep the floor, just in case. You stumble into a midwinter ritual and find the Santa figure stirring a cauldron. In some pagan and early Christian stories, Santa's role was filled by winter witches, goat men, or masked villagers with very loose boundaries. Let's step into the frosty darkness. It's late. The moon hangs like an icy coin in the sky, and the woods echo with the sound of distant chanting, equal parts comforting and unnerving. You follow the torchlight to the village green, expecting mulled wine and maybe a carol or two. Instead, you're met with a scene straight out of the old country's wildest fever dream. A robed figure hunched over a steaming pot, face half-shadowed, tossing in herbs and muttering incantations. You squint, trying to make out the beard or the sack of presents. But instead, you get a whiff of sage and the faint impression that Santa's boots have been replaced with cloven hooves. Welcome to Christmas before it got its PR team. In parts of pre-Christian Europe and well into the early medieval period, the midwinter gift-bringer was as likely to be a wise woman, witch, or magical beast as a kindly bishop. These winter visitors were complicated. Sometimes they blessed you with bread or good fortune. Sometimes they hexed your goat. And sometimes, if you weren't careful, they carried you off for reasons best not discussed in polite company. The lines between witch and Santa were beautifully blurry. In some German and Slavic villages, the central holiday figure was Frau Holle or Perchta, witches of winter who flew through the night, rewarding hard work and punishing laziness. You wanted your spinning done, your hearth swept, and your manners in order, or risk the sort of supernatural feedback that left a lasting impression. If you were lucky, these witches left you silver coins, crisp apples, or a little enchanted bread. If not, let's just say you learned to sleep with one eye open. The goatmen were a whole other level. In Scandinavian and Alpine traditions, the Yule goat, Julbok, or Krampus's distant cousin, was the one to fear, and sometimes to welcome. These horned figures paraded through the village in wild, masked processions, handing out treats or delivering stern warnings. Was the goat man a remnant of old fertility gods? A prankster in disguise? A medieval insurance policy for next year's crops? You never really knew. But every year, he or she returned, demanding respect, ale, and a front-row seat by the fire. And if the local Santa wasn't a witch or a goat, it might just be the wild card of the holiday season. A masked villager, decked out in animal skins and bells, roaming from house to house with a sack of, well, surprises. Sometimes the mask hid the identity of a generous neighbor. Sometimes it was a sanctioned outlet for the community's most chaotic energies. An ancient version of what happens at the Yule ritual stays at the Yule ritual. Social boundaries dissolved in the cold, and the holiday became a liminal time when anyone could be the gift giver, or the gift taker, or just the one stirring the pot. It's no accident that Santa's red robes and magical feats echo the old winter witches and shamans. Before the bishop's mitre and the Coca-Cola branding, there were cauldrons, runes, and a profound respect for the magic of winter survival. The gift-bringer was never just a jolly guest. He or she was the keeper of traditions, the watcher of hearths, the enforcer of rules both spoken and unspoken. Cross them at your peril. So tonight, as you picture Santa dropping off presents with a wink, spare a thought for the witches, goatmen, and masked mischief-makers who paved the way. If you hear cackling outside or smell sage and something vaguely smoky, don't be alarmed. It's just Christmas, old school, messy, magical, and never entirely safe. Sleep well and maybe leave a little extra bread by the fire. You never know who's stirring the cauldron this year. You're falling asleep to a carol that sounds suspiciously like a threat. Turns out, Many old Christmas songs were less about comfort and more about warning you not to get out of bed. Or else, let's set the scene. You're curled up under a lumpy wool blanket, the wind moaning at the window, when your mother starts humming a tune. The melody is sweet enough, but the words, not so much. Sleep, little child, and do not peep. If you wake, the goblins will creep. That's right. Medieval carols weren't written to soothe your soul. They were composed by parents desperate for a silent night and not above using psychological warfare to get it. It's not just a few songs either. For centuries, Christmas music was a mixed bag of theological lessons, existential dread, and seasonal advice. Take the German Sankt Nikolaus ist ein guter Mann. Saint Nicholas is a good man. The first verses promise treats for the virtuous, but by the second stanza, the message turns. Naughty children are promised a visit from Knecht Ruprecht, aka Santa's terrifying assistant, who will either leave you a switch or take you away in his sack. Good luck falling asleep to that. In Spain, children once sang Campana sobre Campana, a lovely melody about bells ringing in Bethlehem. But in rural villages, a local verse was added. If you leave your bed at night, the little man with the bell will take you away. In Italy, La Befana songs offered a similar deal. If you're good, you'll wake to sweets. If not, expect coal or a broomstick with your name on it. In the Netherlands, carols about Sinterklaas explicitly remind kids to stay quiet. Keep still. Don't complain, or Black Peter will come tonight. Nothing says Christmas like a thinly veiled threat wrapped in a catchy chorus. Even the English "Here We Come a Wassailing," which sounds cheerful now, originally included verses about spirits and misfortune visiting those who didn't show proper hospitality. Give us our figgy pudding, or your year will be cursed. Not exactly radio-friendly, but effective in getting a refill on the snacks. Of course, these weren't just random lyrics. In an age when stories were told by the fire and bedtime was a dangerous liminal space between safe and who knows what's out there, music was a tool for survival. Parents needed kids to stay put after dark, not wander outside where wolves, spirits, or, worse, nosy neighbors might be lurking. A lullaby wasn't just a melody. It was a contract. Sleep, behave, or the Christmas bogeyman will know. Sometimes these scary songs weren't for children at all. Adults sang them too, as reminders that the holiday season was a time of thin boundaries and uncertain fortune. Even the joyful God rest ye merry, gentleman, has roots in warning. Let nothing you dismay, because everyone needed reminding that the world outside was harsh, and only through community, order, and a little healthy fear did you make it to spring. But for all their threats and warnings, these songs worked. Kids stayed in bed. People came together to sing, share food, and, perhaps unconsciously, manage the anxiety of the long, dark winter. The carols, however dark, became tradition, woven into the fabric of Christmas like pine needles in the carpet. So tonight, as you drift off, and someone in the next room starts singing Silent Night, be grateful for the upgrades. The only thing threatening you now is the smoke alarm's low battery beep. And if you hear an old tune about goblins, switches, or mysterious visitors, just remember, it's not a threat, it's historical ambience. Sleep well, stay put, and may your dreams be merry, bright, and completely goblin-free. It's the 17th century, and you're watching lawmakers and Puritans try to cancel Christmas. Spoiler: people refuse to give up the feast, the gifts, or the excuse to drink spiced wine before noon. Let's paint the picture. You're in the middle of a frosty English village, or maybe a stern New England town, when suddenly Christmas is declared illegal. No carols, no feasts, no fun. The Puritans have arrived, and they've brought their signature blend of moral anxiety and party-pooping legislation. The streets are watched by men in black hats with the world's least jolly faces, peering through windows to spot any evidence of holiday cheer. The town crier isn't announcing good tidings, but reading out new bans. No mummers, no mince pies, no hanging up holly. You could get a fine, or worse, for so much as humming Deck the Halls. The logic, if you could call it that, went like this. Christmas, with its rowdy misrule, drinking, feasting, and occasional goat masking, was too pagan, too wild, and far too much fun for God's liking. Church services? Fine. Everything else? Absolutely not. England's Parliament issued an ordinance in 1647 abolishing the holiday altogether. Shops were ordered to stay open, churches were to skip the festivities, and anyone caught celebrating could expect a visit from the holiday police. If you thought Office Secret Santa was awkward, try explaining to your neighbor that your roast goose is just a large Tuesday dinner, officer. Across the Atlantic, the Puritans in Boston and Plymouth followed suit. Christmas was so unwelcome that, for over 20 years, celebrating it could get you fined 5 shillings. Children were told that St. Nicholas was a foreign influence, best forgotten. Caroling? That was just an excuse to trespass and beg for food, no better than wanton behavior. In short, the authorities were determined to scrub every scrap of Yuletide joy from public life. But here's where things get interesting. People did not go quietly. In England, protests broke out. Bakers were arrested for making Christmas pies, but that just made everyone hungrier and more stubborn. Secret feasts popped up behind shuttered windows. Carolers sang in whispers, passing forbidden songs from house to house like delicious contraband. In some places, townsfolk staged mock funerals for Father Christmas, burying effigies of Santa as a snarky protest against the ban. Nothing makes a holiday more appealing than telling people they can't have it. Meanwhile, in the colonies, Christmas went underground. Families celebrated in secret, pretending it was just another winter day while passing spiced wine and small gifts under the table. The more authorities cracked down, the more determined the party became. After all, what's the point of a long, dark winter without something to break the gloom? People figured out creative ways to keep traditions alive, inventing innocent games and exchanging sly winks that said, "Yes, we're absolutely not celebrating Christmas, pass the pudding." It took decades, but the Great Santa Purge ultimately failed. In 1660, with the restoration of the monarchy, Christmas was re-legalized in England, and the holiday came roaring back, louder, merrier, and even more determined to stick around. In America, Christmas would stay muted for a while, but as time passed, the old customs returned with new vigor, and St. Nicholas found his way back into stockings and stories. The lesson? You can outlaw the feast, ban the songs, and chase Father Christmas into hiding, but people will always find a way to sneak joy back into the darkest days. The gifts, the gatherings, and the suspiciously large roasts survived, and so did the world's thirst for spiced wine before noon. So, if you ever feel rebellious for eating cookies for breakfast on Christmas morning, remember, you're part of a long, stubborn tradition. And if anyone tries to take your feast away, just sing a carol a little louder. History's on your side. Sleep well, and may your holiday spirit always outwit the holiday police. Flash forward suddenly. Santa's image is everywhere. He's marketing soda, starring in ads, and finally getting the PR makeover of the century. The darkest origins are airbrushed, but somewhere beneath the velvet suit and beard, the old, weird Santa is still watching. Let's set the scene. It's the late 19th century. You're walking down a busy city street. dodging horse-drawn carriages and the occasional flying newspaper. Shop windows are filled with glimmering ornaments and bright red posters. There he is, Santa Claus, round and jolly, perched on every shelf, every billboard, every tin of Christmas biscuits. For the first time, Santa isn't creeping down chimneys or squeezing through keyholes. He's front and center, grinning at you with a twinkle that says, "Buy more stuff." The transition didn't happen overnight. Santa's image has been a centuries-long group project, written and rewritten by poets, illustrators, advertisers, and anyone with a stake in the Christmas economy. Clement Clark Moore's 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, "'Twas the night before Christmas, gave Santa a sleigh, 8 reindeer, and a whole new backstory." Thomas Nast's illustrations in Harper's Weekly over the next few decades gave him a rotund belly, a North Pole address, and, critically, a list. Now he was less bishop, more bearded teddy bear, still a little mysterious, but a lot more cuddly. And then came the true game changer, advertising. By the early 20th century, department stores were hiring men in Santa suits to boost holiday shopping. Santa started showing up in parades and shop windows, handing out candy and posing for photos with children, less supernatural gift bringer, more seasonal celebrity. The public ate it up, and if you've ever tried the free sample aisle at Christmas, you know why. But the real tipping point was a marketing campaign so powerful it rewrote the world's mental image of Christmas. In the 1930s, Coca-Cola hired artist Haddon Sundblom to create a Santa Claus who was plump, rosy-cheeked, and perpetually thirsty for soda. Sundblom's jolly, grandfatherly Santa was a global sensation. He wore the now iconic red suit, which, let's be honest, was a lot more practical for branding than the traditional bishop's robes or witch's cloak. And he smiled from every billboard, magazine, and, eventually, television screen. Suddenly, Santa was everywhere. On greeting cards, postage stamps, chocolate wrappers, and, eventually, at the mall. He became a mascot for cheer, excess, and the most intense 6 weeks of shopping on the calendar. The darker corners of his history, ghostly wild hunts, kidnapping goblins, and midwinter sacrifices, were quietly filed away in the Do Not Discuss at Family Dinner folder. Instead, the focus was on generosity, family, and of course, the magical promise that everyone, no matter how much mischief they caused, could earn a spot on the nice list with just a little effort or a well-timed letter. It's not that the old stories disappeared. They just got, well, laundered. The modern Claus still has a glimmer of the ancient. His list is as judgy as ever. His entrance style is still questionable. And his home is just as inaccessible as the castles of old. But now he comes with brand partnerships, seasonal merchandise, and the unspoken understanding that, as long as you buy the cookies, he'll bring the magic. So tonight, as you see Santa beaming from a soda can or waving from a parade float, remember, behind the velvet, the jingling bells, and the ho-ho-ho, there's a patchwork of centuries, old myths, half-forgotten rituals, and just a touch of seasonal weirdness. Santa may be corporate now, but the wild magic of his origins still peeks out. If you know where to look, sleep well and don't let the marketing elves bite. The snow is deep, and the wolves are howling. Except in some medieval legends, those aren't ordinary wolves. You hear talk in the village about Yule werewolves, cursed souls prowling for Christmas sinners. St. Nicholas isn't just handing out gifts. He's chasing off supernatural threats with a bishop's staff and, possibly, a silver coin or two. Suddenly, putting out milk and cookies feels way less important than garlic and wolfbane. Let's set the scene. You're huddled close to the hearth, every log you can spare crackling against the icy dark. Outside, the forest is alive with things that don't belong in polite carols. You try not to listen as the older kids tell stories, about Christmases when the wolves came closer, or when, just after midnight, someone saw something running on two legs that was a little too hairy, a little too tall, and definitely not on anyone's nice list. The werewolf is not a Hollywood invention. It's an export from the deep anxiety closet of medieval Europe. In the frozen north, December was the time when old curses woke up hungry. People believed that, once a year, sinners and wrongdoers could be cursed to become wolves, especially those who skipped mass, broke fasting rules, or just didn't pull their weight shoveling snow. Be good, or you'll be prowling with the pack by Christmas Eve, was less a threat and more a practical survival tip. But here's the twist. St. Nicholas wasn't just the bringer of presents, but the original winter exorcist. In parts of Germany, Eastern Europe, and the Baltic, villagers told tales of Nicholas as a holy protector, striding out with his crozier and his trademark no-nonsense glare, banishing werewolves and worse from the edges of civilization. Forget sleigh bells. If you heard the clang of a bishop's staff in the dead of night, you knew help was on the way, or at the very least, someone was about to get an unexpected lesson in repentance. Sometimes the solution was spiritual. A prayer, a blessing, a sprinkle of holy water. Sometimes the stories get weirder. In some places, it was believed that a coin from St. Nicholas, or his altar, tucked into your boot, would keep you safe from both wolves and the more supernatural sort. Children slept with bits of bread under their pillows, just in case the Yule werewolf was tempted to swap a bite for a treat. Move over, Tooth Fairy. This was insurance, medieval style. The villagers didn't rely on faith alone. They hung up wolfbane, garlic, or even iron scissors to keep things at bay. On Christmas Eve, you might leave a special plate out, just for the lost souls wandering in wolf form. Give them food, said the oldest tales, and maybe they'll pass your house by. The stakes were real. A bad winter could wipe out a village, and stories about supernatural predators made an otherwise random tragedy seem, well, slightly less random. The wildest part? Some versions of the legend flipped the script entirely. Nicholas himself, traveling in disguise, would test the village's hospitality, showing up cold, hungry, and maybe with a suspiciously hairy face. Only the truly generous, the ones willing to share their best bread or open their doors to a stranger, would get his blessing and avoid a long winter of weird noises at the door. So, as you snuggle under your covers tonight, just remember, St. Nicholas wasn't always about gentle cheer and holiday jingles. Sometimes, he was your last defense against the darkness, holy water in one hand, wolf-fighting staff in the other, and the world's most intimidating glare for anyone caught breaking the rules. Next time you hear a Christmas wolf howl in the distance, don't panic. Just double-check your good deeds, tuck in your garlic, and hope you've been nice enough for a visit from the real winter protector. And if you find a mysterious silver coin in your shoe, congratulations, you survived another Yule. Sleep well, and may all your Christmas monsters stay firmly outside. It's a long winter night, and you're sitting by the fire while elders trade stories about holiday gift-bringers from faraway lands. There's Italy's Befana, a witch on a broom, Germany's Belsnickel, a man covered in fur and ready to smack you with a stick, and the terrifying Père Fouettard, who specializes in discipline. For every cheerful Santa, there's a deeply weird relative making sure no child sleeps peacefully in December. Let's take a tour. The fire is popping, the shadows are long, and just when you're settling into the warm glow of a familiar Christmas tale, the grown-ups decide it's time for something a little more educational. The room fills with whispers of alternative holiday enforcers, each stranger, hairier, and more alarming than the last. First stop, Italy. Forget Santa for a moment and meet La Befana, the original holiday helicopter parent. She's an old woman who soars through the night sky on her broomstick, searching for children to reward or correct. Instead of a red suit, she wears a patchwork shawl, a sensible headscarf, and possibly a few smudges of chimney soot on her face. Befana's gift-giving policy is simple. Good kids get sweets, bad kids get lumps of coal, onions, or, if you've really crossed her, a gentle whack with her broom. Italian children leave out wine and treats for her, hoping to sweeten her mood and their odds. Now, pack your bags for Germany, home of Belsnickel. This is the holiday figure that looks like he's just crawled out of the forest after wrestling with a bear and winning only half the fight. Belsnickel is part Santa, part wild man, all unpredictable. He travels alone, draped in furs and jangling with bells, brandishing a switch for naughty kids and pockets full of sweets for the obedient. Unlike jolly old street Nick, Belsnickel is hands-on, sometimes appearing in person to quiz children on their behavior. Flunk the interview, and it's the stick for you. Pass, and you get a treat. It's like Santa with a surprise pop quiz and a distinct lack of HR oversight. But perhaps the crown for most nightmare-inducing cousin goes to Père Fouettard of France and Belgium. His name literally means Father Whipper. Picture a dark-robed man with a wild beard, often smeared with soot or, depending on the legend, something far less hygienic. He accompanies Street Nicholas, lurking just behind the main act, ready to dole out discipline. If you've misbehaved, he's there to deliver a warning, a spanking, or, in some stories, a trip to his sack, not the one full of toys. It's the holiday equivalent of knowing the principal is waiting just outside your classroom, except with a switch and fewer scruples. There's more. In parts of Central and Eastern Europe, children feared the Yule goat, who could bring gifts, or just stare menacingly through the window. Icelandic kids watched out for Gryla, a giantess who ate misbehaving children, and her sons, the Yule lads, who had their own roster of pranks and petty thefts. Russia has Ded Moroz, Grandfather Frost, who brings presents but is sometimes joined by his granddaughter Snegorochka, a lovely companion unless you're allergic to unsolicited singing and surprise blizzards. The point is, for every jolly Santa, there's a local legend lurking, making sure you don't get too comfortable. These global doppelgangers were insurance policies for parental authority. Be good, or Belsnickel will quiz you on your chores. Be polite, or Befana might sweep away your candy. Obey your parents, or Père Fouettard will discipline you into the new year. So tonight, as you count down to Christmas, remember, Santa is only the friendliest face in a world of holiday weirdness. If you're lucky, you'll get treats. If you're not, well, just be glad you live in the age of elf on the shelf and not witch on the roof. Sleep well and keep an ear out for brooms and bells. You hear a commotion outside. It's the Feast of Fools, or maybe Saturnalia. The rules? There are none. Santa's early incarnations sometimes presided over drunken town-wide feasts, wild street games, and public mockery of authority. If things went too far, the local constable might have to arrest Saint Nick and half the parish choir for indecent snowman construction. Let's step outside, boots crunching in the snow, into a world where Christmas isn't the silent night you've been promised. It's a multi-day, anything-goes festival that makes spring break look like a knitting circle. In the town square, bonfires crackle, and someone's already halfway up the church roof, waving a flag made from tablecloths and questionable decisions. It's not a breakdown of order, it's tradition, and everyone knows the calendar isn't turning until things have gotten at least a little bit out of hand. The Feast of Fools is the medieval cousin of what if everyone was in charge for a day. The lowly are promoted to the highest ranks, the bishop's hat is passed around, and the choir boys appoint one of their own as boy bishop, who then proceeds to lead prayers, blessings, and, inevitably, pranks. The church itself is fair game, incense swapped for stinkweed, sermons replaced with bawdy songs, and confessionals filled with giggling townsfolk telling each other the worst secrets they can think of, real or sometimes just for effect. But don't worry, the mischief isn't confined to the clergy. Saturnalia, the Roman ancestor of Christmas rowdiness, encouraged role reversal for everyone. Masters served slaves, servants dressed as nobles, and the whole town engaged in riotous street games, racing, gambling, food fights, and more. Anyone caught working was immediately pelted with whatever food was left over. If the local lord looked out his window and didn't see chaos, he'd know the village was up to something even worse. And presiding over all this? In some places, a proto-Santa, the lord of misrule. Or sometimes Street Nicholas himself, now less a jolly old soul and more a party planner with diplomatic immunity. He's handing out gifts, sometimes coins, sometimes practical jokes, sometimes just more fuel for the bonfire. In medieval England, the revels might climax with the naughty list read aloud in public, followed by a pie to the face, or, for the unlucky, a dunk in the river. Medieval town police kept a wary eye. But even they knew better than to interfere unless things escalated to snowball assaults or unauthorized barn dances. If the chaos went too far, the town constable would reluctantly intervene, dragging costumed troublemakers off to the stocks. There are real records of priests and singers arrested for cross-dressing in church, local sants fined for immodest mummery, and at least one instance of the village pig being knighted before being roasted for supper. The next morning, the whole community would wake up hungover, hoarse, and ready to blame the Lord of Misrule for everything that went wrong or right. Food and drink flowed like there was no tomorrow, because, honestly, in those days, you never knew. People competed to see who could eat the most pudding, drink the most ale, or build the world's most structurally questionable snowman. It was a time to let loose, mock the powerful, and, just for a little while, laugh in the face of darkness. So as you drift off, listening for the ghostly echoes of riotous laughter and clattering tankards, remember, beneath every modern Christmas party is a long, glorious history of sanctioned mayhem. If you ever feel guilty for having too much fun, just picture Saint Nick, beard powdered with flour, robe askew, leading a conga line of monks, peasants, and very confused police through the snow. Sleep well, and may your dreams be merry, bright, and only mildly unlawful. You're scratching out a note, but it's not a wish list. It's a desperate medieval prayer asking Street Nicholas to spare your village from famine, plague, or taxes. Before kids mailed letters to the North Pole, families invoked Nicholas as a supernatural fixer for real-world disasters, hoping for miracles instead of PlayStations. Sometimes, the only thing in your stocking was hope, and a nervous plea for less locusts this year. Let's settle in for a moment. The room is dim, the fire a sullen glow, and the only paper in the house is a precious scrap rescued from last year's salt shipment. You dip a quill in ink, homemade, and very much not guaranteed to come out of your fingers before Easter, and begin your missive. Dear Street Nicholas, please send grain, spare us the fever, and if possible, convince the tax collector to move to a sunnier climate. This isn't the sort of thing you read out loud in class, but in the medieval world, miracles require a little paperwork, even if it's mostly between you and the saints. Unlike today's glitter-covered letters, complete with crayon illustrations and urgent requests for the latest toy, the original letters to Santa were a mix of holy plea, humble brag, and the occasional subtle threat. We've been very good this year, except for Cousin Henrik, who you can ignore. Please, just enough rain for the barley, and maybe a new pair of shoes if you're feeling generous. Sometimes, families would write out their needs, roll them up, and tuck them behind icons, slip them under the church altar, or even nail them to the parish door in the hope that Street Nicholas, patron of children, sailors, and people with difficult neighbors, was making the rounds. And if you didn't have paper, no problem. People prayed out loud, chanted their requests during midnight processions, or recited rhymed verses as they left offerings by the hearth. The message was clear: help us survive the winter, help us pass the harvest, help us make it through another year without having to eat the family goat. Nicholas, for his part, was a very busy saint. In medieval stories, he doesn't just hand out toys. He rescues sailors from storms, delivers food during famine, miraculously provides dowries for penniless girls, and, on especially impressive nights, revives children who met unfortunate ends at the butcher's shop. For every wild miracle, there are dozens of smaller stories. Someone found a lost cow, a sick child recovered. The mill started working again after months of mysterious failures. In the absence of Amazon, you had to trust in the next best thing. A saint who seemed to specialize in last-minute deliveries. Of course, the system wasn't always reliable. Sometimes you woke up to find nothing at all, a hard winter, a missed prayer, or just a reminder that saints, like Santa, can't be everywhere at once. Other times, your petition worked in ways you didn't expect. Maybe your field was spared, but your boots had mysterious new holes. Maybe the locusts skipped your village, but only because the neighbor set his barn on fire as a distraction. It wasn't all grim. The act of writing, praying, or reciting your wishes was an act of hope. It bound families together, gave communities something to focus on beyond their worries, and filled the coldest months with a sense that, somehow, someone out there was listening. Over time, as life grew slightly less perilous and the postal service got its act together, these prayers transformed into the familiar lists. Dear Santa, I've been good. Please send. But the heart of it remained. A letter, a wish, and the belief that kindness and hope can work a little magic, even on the hardest winter nights. So, as you tuck away your wish list, remember, every letter to Santa is part of a much older tradition, where hope was the greatest gift you could ask for. Sleep well, and may your petitions, however small, find their way to someone who cares. The night drags on, and tales circulate of Nicholas's miraculous deeds, resurrecting sailors, saving condemned men, multiplying bread loaves, and, on a slow week, cursing greedy landlords. But for every miracle, there's a shadow. Storms, icy roads, and mysterious accidents blamed on the same saint if you'd landed on his bad side. In the medieval mind, Santa could be your savior or your worst winter omen, all depending on how you played the game. Let's set the scene. You're sitting around the fire in a cottage full of nervous hope and drafty corners. The candles burn low, flickering as the wind batters the shutters, and everyone's attention turns to the old woman who claims to remember what happened the year Nicholas got mad. Her tales don't disappoint. Saint Nicholas, they say, could turn disaster into blessing with a glance, or, if displeased, leave you wishing you'd never skipped mass or shorted your neighbor at the flour mill. On good years, he was the guardian of the desperate. The sailor, clinging to a wrecked mast, swears he saw a bishop walking on water, guiding him home. A starving family's larder, empty for weeks, miraculously fills with bread after a late-night prayer. Condemned men await the noose, only to have Nicholas appear in a dream, or even in the flesh, arguing their innocence to the baffled local magistrate. The stories spread, embroidered and exaggerated until everyone has a cousin who was once personally rescued by the saint himself. But here's the catch. In the medieval world, miracles and misfortunes were two sides of the same icy coin. If Nicholas could save, he could also punish. Storms that battered ships or ruined harvests were sometimes whispered to be the saint's warning. That year, the baker who watered down his dough got stuck in the snow for 3 days. and his best cow gave nothing but sour milk until he made amends. Don't cross Nicholas, folks mutter, or you'll be digging yourself out of trouble until Easter. You get the sense that for every loaf multiplied, there's a landlord hiding from mysterious chills in the night. When the taxes rise or the roads ice over before market day, someone always wonders aloud whether the saint is sending a message. Was it the skipped donation? The time you forgot to leave an offering at the altar? The day you borrowed a neighbor's chicken and never gave it back? Nicholas, they say, keeps track. His ledger is cosmic, and the consequences are immediate. The miracles themselves are delightfully practical. Saint Nicholas doesn't go in for flashy fireworks. He's more the type to quietly intervene. A lost ring turns up in the well. A missing ox wanders home. A merchant's fortunes recover just when all seems lost. But he's also a stickler for justice. The legend of the greedy landlord who hoarded grain during famine and found his stores filled with dust. That's pure Nicholas, justice with a little supernatural flair, served cold as the January wind. Parents loved these stories. They were instant crowd control for both kids and adults. Got chores to do? Remember the year Nicholas turned the lazy boy's boots to stone? Need a reason not to cheat at dice? He's watching, and you don't want to visit. The tales offered both comfort and a healthy nudge in the right direction. And yet, even with the threat of misfortune, people found hope. To pray to Nicholas was to admit that sometimes you needed a miracle, even a small one. And if you didn't get it, you'd at least get a good story and a reason to try a little harder next year. So as you drift off, think of the winter that's half miracle, half mystery, a season where the lines blur, luck is earned, and the kindness or crankiness of a saint shapes your fortunes. Sleep well, and may your dreams be full of unexpected blessings and absolutely no vengeful landlords. And so, as our sleigh glides quietly away from the shadowy forests, haunted chimneys, and chaotic feasts of Christmas past, let's take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come and how delightfully weird the journey has been. Tonight you've trudged through snowdrifts beside ancient bishops, dodged Krampus in moonlit alleys, outwitted goblins for a crust of bread, and watched as the modern Santa Claus was stitched together from a patchwork of miracles, mushrooms, and marketing meetings. You've met winter spirits, elvish pranksters, and a parade of jolly doppelgangers who'd probably get you put on a neighborhood watch list today. But beneath the legends, under all the soot, fur, and suspiciously lively sacks, the real thread is human resilience. Generation after generation faced down the darkest nights of the year with a blend of fear, laughter, hope, and the urge to leave something, anything, good for the people around them, even if it was just a mysterious gift in a muddy shoe. So tonight, as you tuck yourself in beneath cozy blankets in a house with heating, locked doors, and a total lack of demonic goatmen, maybe send up a quiet thank you to the ancestors who survived endless winters, wild hunts, and the world's first moral panic over unwashed stockings. Be grateful for modern comforts, indoor plumbing, and the simple miracle that your most stressful Christmas guest is probably just Uncle Larry, not a ravenous Christmas werewolf. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that people are stubborn, hopeful, and a little absurd. And that's what keeps the light burning, no matter how dark the night. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of skeleton parades, rogue elves, and anyone trying to climb down your chimney uninvited. Good night.